Hello Ace, this is RetroTK2 and today we're looking at the bare basics of C#. We'll talk about very basic method and class definitions, and we'll also look at basic scoping. Please check out the full Learning C# series Ace. The card should be on your screen now. So let's get started. Well, as with most things Ace, I usually like to get the textbook definition of something in order to understand it a little better. So let's have a look at the definition of what a class is. According to MSDN, a class is a construct that enables you to create your own custom types by grouping together variables of other types, methods, and events. A class is like a blueprint. It defines the data and behavior of a type. If the class is not declared as static, client code can use it by creating objects or instances which are assigned to a variable. The variable remains in memory until all references to it go out of scope. Without getting too much ahead of ourselves here, Ace, a class is like a blueprint that is used when declaring an object. What is an object? Well, we'll look at that a little bit later in this series. I'd advise you to download the channel files, Ace, since you'll get the full Unity project I will use throughout this series. The link is in the description and the card should be on your screen now. You may also want to check out my video on how to download the files, since the file's name might be too long and will need to be saved in the root of your hard drive. The card should be on your screen now. But back to this, Ace. Open Unity and wait for the projects dialog to show. Now click Open and navigate to where you've saved the channel files. The C# Unity project should be located in Video Files, S2 Learning C#, C# Unity. Click Select Folder and Unity should open the C# Unity project. From here you should see the final C# script we'll end up with in the C# bare basics folder. Delete that script, Ace, since we're going to be creating our own. Let's have a look at how to declare a class in C#. Right-click on the C# bare basics folder in the project window of Unity and click Create C# script. This will create our C# script inside the C# bare basics folder. Don't worry too much about the name of this script for this exercise, Ace, since we won't be using it with Unity. Now, we briefly touched upon classes in the Logging to Console video, where we briefly looked at the class Unity generates along with some of the basic Unity methods. But let's get rid of that class and define our own. Now, all classes are defined with the class keyword. You can also include access modifiers and the static modifier, Ace, but they're out of the scope of this video. Add a space to the class keyword and type out the name of your class. In C# you generally stick to uppercase letters, lowercase letters and underscores for identifiers. That's the class name in this case, Ace. We'll discuss identifiers in more detail in a later video. On a side note, Ace, notice how I write out my class's name in title case. These are called naming conventions in programming and are extremely important when it comes to writing clear and succinct code. This is once again out of the scope of this video, Ace, but it's definitely important to mention it when it comes up. At least I think so anyway, Ace. I'd also like to go into detail about what goes inside a class, but I don't want to make this video too bloated. For now, we'll keep it as basic as possible and simply say that a class can contain things called methods. What is a method? Well, according to MSDN, a method is a code block that contains a series of statements. A program causes the statements to be executed by calling the method and specifying any required method arguments. We need to define a method inside the class scope. To do that, type the keyword void while the cursor is inside the curly braces of the class. Using the keyword void here means that our method doesn't have a return value, but we'll touch upon this in a future video, Ace. Add a space and type out your method name, making sure that you're typing it inside the curly braces of the class we defined earlier. To fully declare the method, we need to add an open and close parentheses to the end. After that, we need to add an open and close curly brace to complete a very basic method definition. Again, Ace, a lot of what I'm saying here is pretty abstract and not well explained, but that is very deliberate. I really want to explain these concepts in the barest of ways, since it should be, at least in theory, easier to understand later. Quickly drilling down into a method scope like we're doing should allow us to declare basic data types and view the effects of basic mathematical operations. Now, scope is an incredibly interesting thing in C# and programming in general. If we pop back the MSDN, the scope of a name is the region of program text within which it is possible to refer to the entity declared by the name without qualification of the name. Scopes can be nested. We'll revisit scopes a little bit later, since it will be a lot easier to describe and understand them once we have learnt about objects and variables. For now, I'll show you a very basic example of scope in C#. We have a class called myClass. If I define another class called myClass, you'll see that it causes a compilation error, duplicate definition myClass. However, if I create another class called anotherClass, cut and paste the duplicate myClass class definition into the scope of the anotherClass class, you'll see that the compiler error goes away. You'll also see that you can have nested classes in C#, but again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in this series. Just to really hammer this home, the method myMethod declared in the original myClass class cannot be redeclared within the scope of that class. Doing so brings up a duplication error again. However, it does have to be mentioned that it is possible to have many methods with the same name, but with different method signatures. This is called overloading, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To come back to my original point, it's not possible to declare another duplicate myMethod in myClass. But it is perfectly fine to declare a myMethod method in the anotherClass myClass class. With me so far, Well, if you are, this next thing might be a little bit trickier. We can define a myMethod method in the anotherClass class's scope without giving a compiler error. This is yet another example of the power of scoping. This becomes a lot more impressive when you have a variable in the scope of a method with the same name as a class variable. But once again, we'll talk about this a little bit later. This is a very basic look at C# class and method definitions, but it should put us in a good position for the next video. I know it may seem like I've avoided a lot of explanation in this video, but I really do want to cover this stuff in greater detail later in this series. And that's it. Rate, comment and subscribe, I hope you're looking forward to learning C#. You can email me at retrotk2@gmail.com to wish me a happy new year. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.